want to thank you all for attending the first of two sessions around the Christian response to climate change. Now, this is a very tough and stressful topic for all of us, all right? I can tell you it was very stressful for me to prepare this, and this is coextent with everything that we read in the paper today. As you know, we had a climate summit. We had Greta Thunberg address the leaders of the UN and take it to them. Very proud of that. But, you know, this is one of the, if not the biggest things that it threatens our society right now and our world and ecosystem. And we're going to talk about, in this first half, we're going to talk about a couple of things. First off, we're going to talk about what we think are the right things as far as our personal behavior in affecting climate change. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you you're doing it wrong or, you know, tell you about how I forget to unplug my power supplies and wall warts and things like that, okay? I mean, that's not the point of this. But I'm going to tell you why or interpret to some extent why we feel compelled to do this, and how in some cases we might not be doing this either for the right reasons, or more importantly, think that this is what we need to do primarily, and that's not true, all right? So if you have any questions, if you want to express anything, we can take a brief break and address those. But I've got 24 slides I want to get through here for today, and I'm going to have another 24 next week. And again, we're going to talk about our personal conduct here in this portion and the reality of our carbon footprint here in the United States, all right? Next week, I'm going to address the changes that we really need to be focusing on. All right? So I apologize if this first half is a little dour and a little grim, but the subject is a little dour and a little grim. So I'm not going to put a pretty bow on it, and I'm not going to crack a lot of jokes here. All right? Okay. Okay, it seems like, you know, Inconvenient Truth was 20 years ago, and when I saw that film, Al Gore impressed upon me that, you know, things are going to happen and they're not going to be good. But I didn't know they were going to happen this quickly, I have to admit. Is anybody here surprised by the actual onset of the things he described back then?
Yes.
Absolutely, it's stunning. Okay? We got the Amazon on fire, we're losing the Arctic ice cap. I mean, this Greenland, you name it. Everywhere you look, you're seeing the effects of this situation. And, you know, I could talk about pollution in the oceans and stuff like that, but if you look at the real issue about what's happening to our ecosphere, it starts with greenhouse gas and our carbon footprint. Everything else falls off of that single biggest problem, all right? And these are all the things we're seeing, right? And they are grim, all right? This is all having to do with the climate, storms, flooding, the desertification, so to speak, of formerly arable lands in the sub-Sahara in Asia. We're seeing climate refugees now as a result of these things just in Central America alone. All right? Equatorial lands becoming less inhabitable due to extreme heat. This is in part one of the biggest drivers we're having with immigration from Central America right now. A lot of these people who farm down there just can't do anymore. The climate's not cooperating. It's either too hot, they're getting either too much moisture, or the ecosystem that they're trying to manage is collapsing right from under their feet. Sure topic, huh? Okay, so what this is going to lead to, and this is one of the scariest things that we really consider, is the increase in failed states, all right, due to the scarcity of viable, habitable lands. Massive growth in the number of dislocated refugees they estimate to be as high as 150 million by 2050. Now, right now, I think they estimated it something in the neighborhood of, help me out, about maybe 5 to 10 million. So this is going to get a lot worse. It's going to get a lot better unless we address this issue. Heightened regional conflicts over resources like water, arable lands, trade routes, and commercially viable ports of commerce. Hasn't happened yet, but it can definitely come. Failures of power grids. Different cause, but the Fukushima meltdown in Japan was a result of a failed power grid, all right? Failed power grid, the power grids are what keep us going and keep us stable as far as energy generation energy, distribution, hospitals, everything that we need to run our more sophisticated institutions are dependent on the power grid. And then this is the worst, mass starvation, all right? And I think we've always had, as a society, a worldwide society, had to deal with periodic starvation. But this isn't gonna get any better either, okay? And again, it's a decline of arable land, decline of crop yields, collapse of fisheries. That alone is huge. Most of Asia is fed by the ocean. So supply chain failures, all of this. So what does the Bible tell us about this? Well, the wealthy are the ones who experience this the last. It's the poorest who experience the first. This is our Christian sense of justice is affected by global warming and climate change. All right? It impacts us. It makes us, it's incumbent upon us to respond and provide the sustenance and care for these people. That is our Christian duty. I mean, there's no question about it. I didn't have to think very long, but for Proverbs, this is a really good one. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. Well, if we don't do something about this, they're not going to get any justice. I can tell you that right now. Okay, and then this one's a no-brainer. Second commandment. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. It's hard to say we love our neighbor if we feather our nest at the expense of, 80% of the rest of the world. All right? So this is a no-brainer. Now, everyone's kind of in shock when we really kind of unpack all this stuff. It really comes in. How do we react? Well, there's so much of it happening every day, I'm overwhelmed. I mean, you can't hit a newspaper, you can't go to a website without seeing some story you didn't know before, or it's like, you just, oh God, you want to look away, turn over to the TV page, whatever, but just, it's overwhelming. And understandably, I mean, we're individuals, we have sensitivities, we care about these things, and yet we're beaten over the head with this issue every day. So what do? We get numb. That's not a good thing to become with this topic. We have to be reactive to this topic and not just, insulate ourselves as best we can from it. It is frightening. I'm frightened, all right? There's no question about that. And I'm very frustrated. Anybody here frustrated with this? It seems like we are incapable of doing anything that really impacts it. I mean, it's almost a sense of helplessness. So, this kind of it makes you really want to do the right thing, because if you can't get other people to do it, at least you can do it, right? And that's at least a good way to initially respond. But we got to go way beyond that. All right? Sadly, there's no question about that. I mean, just the loss of habitats, species. I mean, the thing with the birds. I mean, this is sad. And again, angry. Okay, but is it motivating us to action, or are we just getting too numb to do anything really effective about it? Or are we kidding ourselves thinking the things we're doing are enough? And that's the danger. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, again, I said this at the beginning, I'm not going to spend a lot of time telling you how to manage your household, what you should be doing individually at home. But I mean, everybody here has gone through this a million times, seen it a million times, watched it a million times. People pass around, and it's a good thing to pay attention to. All right, it really is. I mean, what you eat, how you cook, your thermostat setting. The Energy Star recommendation to reach or for us to hit our goal of not warming the Earth by 2030 by 2 degrees Celsius. They say the setting for your thermostat, average setting for everybody's thermostat, needs to be something like 78 during the summer. How many of you have your thermostat set at 78? That's good. And I appreciate the candor of those who don't, all right? Okay. Power supplies. This is a big sucker of energy in your house. Most people don't even are aware of it, but there's these wall warts that we have, like charging up our, cordless wine uncorker, or any one of a number of things. We leave them plugged in. They suck juice, especially the small and cheap ones. They suck juice whether they're charging or not, all right? And they compose a big chunk of your energy bill. It's a hidden charge, all right? No one thinks about it, but if you have chargers, you should put them on master buses and turn them off periodically, and only turn them on until the charge light goes off on the device. You should manage them. Don't let them manage themselves, because they don't. Now, your larger computer power supplies are a lot more sophisticated. They will reduce their consumption if they feel the host or the client battery is fully charged. They'll back their draw way down. But those little wall warts, they're just drinking it in and radiating whatever heat they don't use. All right, lights. This is a no-brainer. You turn them off. Do you have the right kind of bulbs? All that stuff. You know, see, we could go on. Trash recycling. You're putting the wrong things in recycling. That's a big mistake. All right. Yard and garden. How many fertilize their yard? All right. I can tell you, fertilization is one of the major contributors to both water degradation in the Gulf and a large source worldwide nitrous oxide. All right. So, and again, if you're gardening, are you planting the appropriate plants? That kind of stuff. And then your hobbies and recreation. I can tell you, I like to build models, and I wind up using aerosol paint. That's a bad thing. I've been trying to convert it over to the water-based paints, and it's tricky. They're not as reliable, and they don't put as good a finish on it. But I'm working on it, trying to work on it. All right, so if we're doing this, great. If we're not, we can kind of feel guilty, right? And believe it or not, seems like a gigantic growth industry to make you feel guilty about this. Okay, and so I'm not trying to make you feel any more guilty here, but taking it back one step up, I mean, when we buy a home or select a place to rent or whatever, we may making the choices based on how viable it is from an energy efficiency standpoint. It's kind of like that's after the fact. We buy it based on the location, or we buy it based on whether we like the floor plan, or we do this, that, and the other. And then we say, well, we'll upgrade all these things. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we never get around to doing it, all right? But when you buy all this stuff, proximity to stores, do you have to drive a car every time you have to go to the store? Are you in an area with bike lanes? I'm not. Public transportation, is it easy to use? Is it local? Can you get to it easily? All these considerations, all right? And then you're making the right choices as a consumer. This is a series of behaviors that make a big difference in terms of our energy footprint and carbon footprint. What kind of groceries? Are you buying locally sourced groceries? Or are you buying factory processed stuff that has a lot of packaging involved with it? Everything you buy has a carbon footprint. All right? Dining. What you got? You're getting fast food. When you get carryout, you're getting a lot of styrofoam with it. If you go to a restaurant and you're going to get overserved, because portion size has gotten ridiculous, right? Well, are you going to ask for a to-go box and get some more styrofoam? Or, I have friends who actually will bring in their own Tupperware if they're in a restaurant, and that's a good thing. That's just smart, all right? Consumer goods, again, everything you buy. Do you buy the cheapest thing, or do you buy something, you do your research and buy something that's well-made and has a long service life? It's like stepping over quarters to pick up pennies if you always buy the most inexpensive thing, almost invariably in terms of things like this. And again, this all winds up in the landfill once it's, or recycled, which means they send it over to China where they burn it or something. It's an important consideration and an important responsibility. Your vehicle, is it appropriate to what you need it for? All right? I personally have a thing about SUVs. We didn't need them and we got them anyway. It's like, okay, driving, you got a car, do you drive it economically? Speed limit, are you responsible? If you have a wreck, the carbon footprint over the repair of your automobile is staggering, all right? A new car, very big carbon footprint. And again, do we take public transit when we can? Do we ride our bikes? Do we walk? All good questions. All right. Now I'm going to tell you that everything we just went over is a good thing to do. But it isn't the only thing. In fact, it's not enough. All right? But, again, there's a huge... this subject is packed with guilt. All right? For us. Every one of us has a sense of guilt about our own personal behavior. And, in a way that's good, but in a way, maybe not all that good. Okay? Because, again, it kind of distracts us from what's really going on with greenhouse gases. All right? Now, I call these next 3 graphs the guilt graphs. Okay? The pie charts here. And this is going to impact why we feel, and rightfully so, feel so guilty about our behavior with regard to some of the stuff we just went over. Okay, this is the share of global carbon dioxide emissions from fuel combustion in 2015. Now, some of this has changed over the past 4 years, but this is the most recent one I could find, and I apologize for that. But if you see, the United States, if you notice, these are all the top countries in terms of their share of the global carbon dioxide emissions for the fuel combustion. All right? The United States is at 15%. Now, here's something that when you take that fact and you couple it up, and I'm going to show you another pie chart, and this is our share of the world population. We're less than 5%, yet we are responsible for 15% of the CO2 emissions in the world. All right? Now if that doesn't make everybody feel kind of sheepish, all right? It should. All right, and again, you look at some of these other countries, and they weren't even on the previous one. They're not even in the top 1%, or they hadn't even broken into above 1% of their share of the CO2 emissions. Yet their populations are much larger percentage of the total global population. So the per capita footprint varies wildly. All right? This is actually a more recent, I think this is 2018. These are the CO2 emissions per capita for the top 10 industrialized countries, and then some comparisons. Now, you'll notice Australia, the U.S. and Canada, excuse me, getting dry here. You'll notice Australia, U.S. and Canada are at the top, and when you think about it, they're very similar countries. Really high standard of living, spread out. They don't have really sophisticated, fully integrated public transit systems like a lot of Europe and Asia does. All right? There are a lot of things in common. And something you really need to keep in mind, all 3 of these countries have a major political party that is controlled by the fossil fuel industry. All right? Let's make no mistake about that. This isn't by accident. All right? All right. Now, this is interesting. Germany has one of the most advanced public transit systems in the world, and yet they still have 9.6 tons per annum per capita. And why would you think that would be?
Because they make the most fabulous cars to drive.
What he said, Angela Merkel is like the diametric opposite of our lizard brain president, right? So, but she has the same kind of challenges to her that, we make to our leaders. And the Green Party goes to Angela and says, why don't you outlaw 240 kilometer per hour speeds on the Autobahn? Right? You think that has a carbon footprint? Damn straight. And Angela's like, no, the Germans, we make, Mercedes-Benz diesels, and we drive us, this is what we do, this is why we're Germans. That's really what the answer was. And so, they could be down here, well, Japan's not even on here, but they could be a lot lower if they would just get rid of some of that automobile practice that they have. So, this is just kind of an example. And now, we're all feeling guilty, right? And it's just, this is what they want us to do, and okay. This is a breakdown. Now, when this is one of the older pie charts here. I think this is around 2015 too. This has gone down to about, what we say, about 18.5 in the previous. So, but this is how this breaks down in terms of, it's the source, okay, and of our 20 tons or 18.5 tons. And this is a very, very, very important pie chart to look at, okay? 14% is of our carbon footprint. This comes from electricity, okay? Travel is 14%. Americans and Western Europeans enjoy some of the most highest rates of jet travel per capita of any society in the world. And that's a biggie. If you go to a carbon footprint calculator, you're doing great. You know, I'm driving a low emissions vehicle or an electric vehicle, this, and you have everything that's good, and you throw in your air travel, and all of a sudden, you know. So, local transport, that's the commute. The United States has a lot of automobile commuting. I mean, a ton, obviously. Anybody who's living in Atlanta knows that, right? Far more so than the rest of the world, the industrialized world. Most of the rest of the industrialized world, except for maybe Canada and Australia, has far more highly developed public transit systems for commuting, all right? Okay, and then the other things are a little more esoteric. Heating and cooking, food, goods, again, that, you know, you have hire people to do things for you, and then other things. And the other things would be things like, you know, mowing your yard, painting your house, blah, 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 whatever. Okay? Now, we've already talked about how we can affect the size of and reduce the size of this with the behaviors that we've discussed regarding our homes and our, you know, our practices as consumers. But this is a very sobering fact. This 20 tons is what the rest of the world wants to get to in terms of their standard of living. There's not a single country that doesn't have people that want to live just like us. This is what a prosperous country looks like on a per capita basis. All right? So we can sit there and do all this stuff and get our footprint down, but we're not going to change the basic reality that, you know, that everybody else wants to be just like us. More importantly, and this is something that makes this even more intractable to address effectively, these all represent gainful employment for somebody. All right? There's nobody involved in any of those sectors that is doing it because they want to ruin the planet. They're doing it because they think it's their duty for their families and for their own well-being, obviously, taking care of themselves. All right? This does not go away. The underlying mechanisms that drive this gigantic carbon footprint we have, all right, will not go away easily. And I'm going to quote Upton Sinclair here. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Truer words were never spoken. All right? Now, this is something I think, okay, this is my personal opinion, but I'm going to state this or present it to you. It is tempting to look at how and what we can do to mitigate the issue of climate change, and after embracing some of these potential solutions, to see this issue as falling out along political lines, reducing it to self-righteous us versus them viewpoints. But it's not that simple. And make no mistake, there's a huge political component involved in this. We're going to talk about that next week. We're going to talk about ourselves this week, okay? Furthermore, breaking down issues addressing global warming and environmental degradation along political lines in our personal relationships, social relationships, business relationships virtually ensures our collective inability to effectively address these critical problems on a local, state, national, and global basis. This polarization is what makes our polarization on this issue is what makes us so ineffective in dealing with it. All right? Finally, holding judgment upon who's part of the problem versus who's part of the solution is presumptuous and fraught with error, and I'm going to show you an example of that. This is kind of a cheap one, but I'm going to go ahead and show it to you. The reality is everybody is part of the problem, whether they realize it or not, and correspondingly, everyone can be part of the solution if they can be persuaded to do the right thing in our collective self-interest, and that's a big ask. A lot of persuasion. You've got to be very careful and very tactful about how we get there, all right? But polarization, outright just us versus them, that's exactly what the fossil fuel industry wants. All right? Now, here's an exercise here. Spot the Trump voter. All right? All right? Spot the Hillary backer. Now, this is obvious, right? I mean, by the way, that's I know plenty of hard right-wing Republicans that drive economy cars, and I know plenty of tree huggers that drive big-ass trucks, okay? That's, believe it or not, those hypocrisies are everywhere in our society, those contradictions, all right? But, say, Davey Dooley up there owns his own HVAC business. He lives in a double-wide trailer near Pell City, Alabama, all right? He hunts. He has 2 kids in school. He did vote for Trump. He is a proud member of the NRA, and he just detests Democrats, okay? He's a neo-segregationist because that's the way his daddy taught him, all right? Penny Prius at the bottom is, he has an MBA and lives in a efficient high-rise in Midtown, and she's got this beautiful Toyota hybrid, and my gosh. Now, who do you think, here's the thing to really consider. Just as an example, who do you think has the bigger carbon footprint? Individual. Who?
Penny Prius, because she flies places.
Exactly. Penny Prius is a consultant. She does 2 overseas trips a year for recreation, and she travels 20 to 30 round trips a year on business. Oh, and by the way, whereas Davey Dooley is putting in more efficient HVAC units in Alabama, she's consulting to a restaurant conglomerate that has chains of steakhouses and fast food. All right? So looks are misleading, and our assumptions are on this subtopic in particular are very dangerous. All right? And again, one of the reasons why we can't effectively address this domestically, socially in our country. It's this kind of thinking, and it's got to go. Now, old Davey has a right to have a vehicle that can haul around the stuff he has to deliver. And she is very smart for driving a hybrid. I'm not taking anything away from either of their choices. But I will tell you this. People who own large, gigantic trucks for no reason other than they just like having them, that's got to change, all right? And that ain't going to change by taking them away from them. That's going to change by making them want to decide, I don't need this any longer. Now, how do you do that? Taxes, government policies. That's how you do that. Higher energy costs. Our society is drunk on cheap gasoline, all right, and our economy. All right, so enough with the guilt graphs. We're going to go to what I call the scare graphs here. All right, now, this is a breakdown of the sources of anthropogenically generated, human-generated greenhouse gases. And as you can see, CO2 is the big gorilla here, 62%, all right? The fluorine gases are very small in terms of, The fluorine gases are very small in terms of how much gas is actually emitted, but they create a very intractable greenhouse gas effect once they're released in the atmosphere. And they're a byproduct of electrical distribution equipment. They're used to prevent, every one of these transformers you see has a fluorine gas in it to keep flashover fires from occurring. But if that stuff gets in the atmosphere, it is like the worst on a, per cubic inch basis, so to speak, in terms of greenhouse gas effect. NTO, that's 6%, that's nitrous oxide, and that's a byproduct of fertilizer use, factory farming, fertilizing your lawns. By the way, I have fertilized my yard too, so I'm not pointing fingers. Okay, methane, CH4. If you address CO2, you will address methane. Methane is almost always a byproduct in some cases of fuel production, fossil fuel production, all right, as well as industrial processes. CO2 released from chemical manufacturing, and then CO2 from land use, and that's a big one there too, because that's primarily from agribusiness, forestry, high volume agribusiness, like, you know. So that's the percentage, and so you can see CO2 is the big one we have to tackle, and this is where their primary focus is. And again, if we tackle CO2, we will attack, and tackle it effectively, we will also have some co-extent reduction in these others, all right? Now, this is the source of those greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see, food and land use, about 25%, 24%. Electricity, 25%. Transportation, interestingly, is only 14%. Industry, 21%. Buildings, okay, 6%. Buildings, that's standing buildings and building new buildings. You know, the very leading edge of our expanding economy produces a huge amount of greenhouse gas. Pouring cement, all the things related to construction, tearing down forests for lumber, using land that, you know, to build parking lots that you could use for carbon sink. I mean, all those things. And then other energy production is about 10%. All right? Now, this is worldwide. This isn't just the U.S. This is both of those. That's worldwide. All right? Now, this is the best. This is the worst one. This is the fate of carbon dioxide emissions in our atmosphere. All right? 45% of them don't get absorbed. They just add to the existing growth in greenhouse gas. That's how over the top we are. And the other is part of it's absorbed by land-based sinks, which is like things like rainforest, any kind of forest, any kind of natural, that undisturbed land has a natural carbon sink capability. All right? Ocean-based sink is 23%. Now, the problem, anybody who's paid any attention sees with this is that both of those sinks, carbon sinks, are getting attacked daily. The Amazon's on fire, all right? Why? Because the Brazilians want to sell more meat to the Asians. And now, thanks to our lizard brain president, they want to sell more soybeans to the Chinese, all right? So what's the result? Oh, they doubled the amount of acreage they're burning in the Amazon over last year. Purely as a response to an economic, what they see is an opening in an economic market. All right? Now, do we have the right to tell the Brazilians to stop doing that? No, we can incentivize them to stop doing it, right? Well, what does that take? Again, it takes a much bigger effort than, you know, managing your wall warts at home. Okay? So again, what is the significance of an increase in the average world temperature of 2 degrees Celsius? This is the target of Kyoto and now the Paris Accord, right? If we're at an overall average increase of 2% by 2030, we're toast. All right? That's what they're saying. Be clear, it's been reported by the World Scientific Academies. Climate change is occurring due to the rapid increase in anthropogenically created greenhouse gas, trapping heat from the sun and raising average temperatures globally. The single largest component, CO2. These same scientific academies have said that we have until 2030 to reduce greenhouse emissions sufficiently to prevent the average global temperature from warming by 2 degrees centigrade, which is identified as the tipping point for total destabilization of the world's climate. 10 years. It's kind of scary. All right. Now this is a map that has measured and average temperature by region on the Earth, average temperature changes over the past approximate 100 years. All right? And as you can see, red is the demarcation for 2 degrees Celsius. Now again, this is over the past 100 years. They're talking about the next 10 years for the whole world to turn that red color. All right? And as you can see, there's even some spots where it's even darker. That's where the temperature's gone up even higher. And this is all from historical temperature measurements. So this is where we are right now. This is the snapshot of what the world looks like now relative to that 2% Celsius goal. All right? If in 10 years you put this map up and the whole thing's red, you will know we have failed. All right? So I'm going to read, this is an excerpt from an article in the Daily Beast. And this is kind of the conclusion to our presentation today, now that everybody's all cheered up. Right? This guy's name is Jay Michelson. He's got a JD from Yale, Juris Doctorate, and a PhD in theology from the Hebrew University. He's a rabbi. He's a very snarky writer. He's very funny to read, but he doesn't really read so well in this kind of context. But he is writing about, well, the name of the article is Why Your Carbon Footprint Means Less Than You Think It Does. All right? First, if you run the numbers, it's obvious that if every do-gooder in the world changed their light bulbs to fluorescent, stopped going on vacations, and bought carbon offsets for every art project they built at Burning Man, all right? I jumped ahead, sorry. None of this would make a dent in global carbon dioxide emissions, and it's true. I mean, you know, the Chinese have like, what, a 5-ton per capita, yet they're, what? 1 out of every 4 people in the world from China. So, you know, we could completely clean our act up and it wouldn't make a personal, and it wouldn't make a dent in the total issue regarding this climate change issue. Meeting that goal of 2%. All right? Now, does that mean we shouldn't do that? No, we should. All right? And we should, look, take away the goal. You'll live longer. You'll eat better. You'll have more money. There's a lot of compelling reasons to do this anyway. All right? But thinking that's going to get us to the promised land as far as the CO2 issue? Right? There just aren't enough bleeding hearts to go around, and that's true. All right? Moreover, individual behaviors are not the major causes of global warming. And oh, by the way, the worst offenders that we saw in terms of the total footprint, carbon footprint, those are populations that are declining. It's the ones at the bottom end. They're growing like wildfire, and they all want a higher standard of living. And oh, by the way, their climate's getting hotter and hotter. They're going to want electricity. Why are they want electricity? Because they're going to want air conditioning. All right? That ain't going away. So, individual behaviors are not the major causes of global warming, and this is what we have to take away from this today. The major drivers of CO2 emissions are collective enterprises like power grids, and that's from fuel source to use, all the way. Drilling, mining, burning, processing, and then wasting or using, all right? Electricity is a great thing, all right? But it's not magic fairy dust. It comes from something, all right? It either comes from a renewable source or nuclear power or fossil fuel. It's that simple, all right? So, cutting back on flying while allowing cars and trucks to operate as usual is like drinking diet soda with a bacon double cheeseburger, right?
Hey, now.
Hey, I do that too, right? But the benefit is negligible and totally negated by the much, much larger problems that are going unchecked. Fighting global warming takes systemic change, collective action, and cooperation amongst much larger populations, not just those motivated and privileged enough to make the changes themselves. Right? So, if you feel compelled to do all those right things, please continue to do them. But don't for a minute think that's enough. All right? Now, you read this and you think, oh, our president just said the future belongs to patriots, not globalists. But I'm here to tell you that if we don't all become globalists, we're going to miss this. Okay? We're going to miss this big time. All right? Now, I've tried to keep this as nonpartisan as possible, but next week, it's going to get very partisan. All right? And if any of you are active Republicans, please show up, all right? Because I'd definitely like to know your take on what we're going to talk about next week. But next week we're going to talk about why our government right now is the way it is, all right? what that represents in terms of world leadership to get where we need to go with addressing global warming. Right?
In some ways, it's a moot point, but one of the huge problems in terms of making responsible choices and the best choices, which often means having the money to spend, okay, to make the best choices, when you consider that half of the population in the United States is at poverty level or below, those choices
Right,
are
no,
choices.
they're not choices, those are imperatives.
Those are imperatives.
Absolutely.
Okay, so sometimes you got to skip service on your car.
Absolutely.
Okay? So that affects gas
Right.
prices. Rotating your tires affects
Right, if you
gas
can
prices.
only afford a place that has really cheap windows and a wall unit,
Cheap
right?
food.
Right, that's true. That's
That's the biggest
absolutely
thing.
true. Right.
Cheap food. I mean, you can't buy fresh food.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing too is Ezra Klein's most recent book talks about the same thing, where if every person on the planet took responsibility, it wouldn't put a dent in it because of economic and political situations, which I know we're going to go into next week.
That's exactly right.
But,
Yes.
but that is, so that's why in some ways what we do is moot unless we make
Other things.
political decisions.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Now, there's one. This is an amazing individual. I'm very impressed with her. The more I read about her and the more I listen to some of the things she's done, I'm like, wow. But it's a sad commentary on our society when some of the most effective voices we have are young girls, all right, who, from Sweden, all right, and who feel compelled enough to disrupt their personal lives to such an extent that that she's doing what she's doing, okay? I'm just incredibly impressed with this individual. And I'm going to read you what she told the UN last Monday. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are at the beginning of mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth.
Amen.
Right? It's kind of hard to dispute. So, on that cheerful note,
Send us off with prayer.
and this is just the prelude for next week, but from Isaiah, woe to those who enact evil statutes and to those who constantly record unjust decisions so as to deprive the needy of justice and rob the poor of my people of their rights, so that widows may be their spoil and so that they may plunder the orphans. Now what will you do in the day of punishment, in the devastation which will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help? And where will you leave your wealth? So this is a pretty powerful thing to consider relative to this topic. And it's interesting how some of these really hardcore Old Testament passages touch this issue so well. Okay.